The book of Revelation is, of course, a book of prophecy, striking imagery as well as contrast. It's important sometimes to dig in the book in different ways. I just wrote down a few of the contrasts that are contained within Revelation that are the obvious ones. For example, the angel of the Lord versus the dragon, the woman clothed with the sun versus the woman clothed in scarlet, the beast and his mark versus the lamb and his mark, Babylon versus the New Jerusalem. For example, Babylon is watered by the Euphrates. The New Jerusalem, the water flows from beneath the throne. There's just a whole bunch of contrasts. The chaste bride, the wife, as is being described in Revelation, versus the harlot with whom the kings of the earth fornicate. There are so many of these contrasts that if you're really looking, you can see even within the book, as I've mentioned, bookends of Genesis and Revelation, even within the book itself, you can find those same type of contrasts. The nations that walk in the light of the New Jerusalem versus Babylon that deceives the nations. And you can keep going, but I think you get the idea. So at some point, if you were interested in going through the book, that would be a good way. A lot of times we try to understand the book of Revelation along with, we'll call them the helps of Ezekiel and Daniel, the other prophets, and some tertiary material that helps us to understand the book of Revelation. But there are things that can also help us, like painting those contrasts and also finding similarities, which I will cover in a minute. And the similarities that I'm going to refer to will be between Revelation and Ezekiel, and we'll talk about those a little bit because it's important to note them. Equally in this book of Revelation, you're going to find, probably more so than in any other book of the Bible, numbers are incredibly important. Now, some people have taken that to the extreme. I've seen people who have done numeric sequencing throughout the Old and New Testament because they believe that there is some type of a Bible code. I wouldn't go so far as that. You can find interesting things anywhere, but I would tell you that numbers are important. And the numbers in the book of Revelation, they are important as numbers. They are also important as to what they represent. I want to quickly go through these because at some point in this series, one may want to reference the numbers and what they mean. Of course, number 1 being the number of God. Number 2, the number of adequate witness. We talk about that 2. There will be, for example, in the book of Revelation, 2 witnesses preaching and heralding the message. There's always this concept, Old and New Testaments. There's 2 testaments, adequate witness. 3 is divine manifestation or completeness to the third power, depending on how you're reading that. Number 4 is the number of the whole earth, and this is important because when you get into reading about the city and the numbers of the city, you're going to see some reoccurring things. For example, the base of the number 12, 12, which is 12 squared, or 144 cubits, or 144,000. So a lot of that is numbers that have either been multiplied, but the number portion of that is important in understanding what's contained therein. There's always double, sometimes triple meanings when you're dealing with numbers. 5 is the number of grace. 6 is the number of man. And it's equally important. People have come up with a lot of ideas about the number 666. Think about this. It is definitely the number of a man, but do not think that is divine manifestation. Satan also uses numbers in another way as well. So we need to be cognizant. Numbers are important. They are relevant. And at some point, maybe we'll talk about the 666 of Revelation. A lot of people have come up with some really fantastic theories. They're all just that, fantastic theories. Okay? Number 7 is the number of perfection. Number 8, the number of new beginning or resurrection. Number 9, divine completeness or finality. Number 10, we could put down, and I have done this many times, as human responsibility or the number of grace twice, 5 and 5. 11 as disorder, chaos, and judgment. Number 12 as government, usually as divine government, also used as of the nation of Israel as a whole. So numbers are very important, and you might say when we get into this, for example, 7 churches, the 7 churches of Asia Minor. Everything in the book of Revelation, we need every part of it to be able to see what the numbers mean. And in some cases, by the way, the numbers actually have other meanings. They won't just be their numeric value or what they represent. They may have other meanings, which I may or may not get to before the end of this series. Now, I used contrasts at the beginning. Let me give you the comparisons of Ezekiel and Revelation. And if you were looking, I just want to show you something. We'll see if we can, sometimes we can flip our pages back and forth just to kind of, I know you can do it. It's not like some evil Knievel stunt here. So just like this, right? Yeah. All right. It's not magic. All right. So I have my hand in Ezekiel 40, and I also have my hand in Revelation 21. So Ezekiel 40, verses 1 and 2, but specifically, I want you to look at the second verse. And the visions of God brought me into the land of Israel and set me upon a very high mountain, by which was as the frame of a city on the south. And he brought me thither, and now he's going to see a man, describe the man with a measuring line. But read Revelation 21, and if you look at verse 10, he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. So we have similarities in that they both saw in the high mountain, but where there is obviously, I'm just doing this to show you can do these back and forth, where there is obviously a little bit of a difference here. It says the city in Ezekiel 40 and verse 2, by which was as the frame of a city on the south. He is not seeing a city as John is seeing, coming down from heaven. He's just seeing. This is important. In Ezekiel 43, say by about verse 2, and behold, the glory of God, the God of Israel, came from the way of the east, and his voice was like a noise of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory. And if you're familiar with Revelation and John's writing, there's elements throughout this whole thing that are like, sound exactly like what John would be describing. It was according to the appearance of the vision which I saw, even according to the vision which I saw when I came to destroy the city. And the visions were like the visions that I saw by the river Chebar, and fell upon my face. And it says here, so the Spirit took me up, verse 5, and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house. And if you read, you see that Ezekiel sees the glory of God abiding. If you read in the book of Revelation, as we've seen, in 21 and 11, what John sees, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even a jasper stone, clear as crystal. We'll talk about the stones as well. As I said, Ezekiel saw water flowing, which was flowing from the temple, if you want to see where that is. And I want to show you, because some folks haven't really spent much time in Ezekiel, so I want you to see these very crystal clear. Ezekiel 47, and verse 1, afterward he brought me again unto the door of the house, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward. For the forefront of the house stood toward the east, and the waters came down from under the right side of the house at the south side of the altar. And if you remember what John sees in 22 and verse 1, In 22 and verse 1, it says, "And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb." So again, if you want to go back to Ezekiel 47 and verse 12, "And by the river upon the bank thereof, on this side and on that side, shall grow all trees for meat, whose leaves shall not fade, neither shall the fruit thereof be consumed. It shall bring forth new fruit according to his months, because their waters they issued out of the sanctuary, and their fruit thereof shall be for meat, and the leaf thereof for medicine." And again, you read the same concept of the tree in Revelation 22 and verse 2. "In the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, there was a tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, yielded her fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations." So we could go through this, that the trees bore fruit monthly, both include that. Ezekiel describes a 4-square city. John describes a city cubed. There's all of these things that we can keep going back and forth. Ezekiel describes a city with 12 gates. John is describing a city with 12 gates. And right down to things like the last part of Ezekiel, the name of the place, the Lord is there. And then we read in Revelation where it says that the Lord is dwelling among his people. There is no temple. Why? Because the Lord is the temple. So you've got a really good sense here of a lot of these comparisons, but what is different? And this is what's important, because a lot of people have proposed a lot of different theories of why there is so much similarity. Some have speculated that John was not only well familiar with, but probably had committed to memory the book of Ezekiel, which is entirely possible. I'm not going to say that it's not. However, what is and what must be noted is that what Ezekiel sees is looking at, we'll call it the time of the 1,000 years, what will be on earth during that 1,000-year period. Snippets of that are seen in the book of Revelation, but leading up to, and then a time where essentially when you start, I believe, in chapter 20 forward, you're talking about, actually 20 is referencing the millennial kingdom, but forward is describing a completely new realm that will become our future home and permanent heaven, which is the new heaven, New Jerusalem. There is a big difference between the two. Some have suggested, one of the commentators who's an old-timey Seiss, he said that in his talks on the apocalypse, he said the city is squared. But then you've got somebody who is known, if you're a person who knows the old-timey folks of church history and those who contributed a lot to writing commentaries and so forth, a person like Ironside, who believed that this was the description, bear with me, of a pyramid. So, now some of you are going, the wheels have started off there. Listen, that's all kind of fanciful. The main thing that is an absolute is what is being described is the future and permanent home of the saints. And so it struck me as something really interesting as I kind of began to look at this, the description that is given in Revelation 21. And if you haven't turned back there, please do so, because now we'll get into some kind of interesting concepts. So, let me read here. "There came unto me one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, and I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. He carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. And her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal, and had a wall great and high. and had 12 gates. And at the gates 12 angels, and the names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. Now just stop for a second and go back with me and kind of see. John is being led to see certain things, and the first thing he describes is it had a wall, great and high, 12 gates, 12 angels standing essentially in front of those gates, and in front of each of the gates, the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east, 3 gates, on the north, 3 gates, on the south, 3 gates, on the west, 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So here's what's interesting. You've got the imagery of 3 gates on each side, so four sections, 3 gates apiece. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in the foundations the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city and the gates thereof and the wall thereof, which sounds radically like that which Ezekiel saw in Ezekiel 40 and verse 3, where he says there was one that came that had a measuring rod and measured. And the city lieth 4 and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlong. The length and breadth and height of it are equal. Now that has brought some people to say, because they've read this, that the length and the breadth and the height, and they've used that, but there are some translational issues. I am going to tell you that length and breadth, yes, the height, and the word for height may still need to be explained. There is one thing we know for sure, that there is a word that was translated to essentially bring us to the English version, which should have actually read rim. And I hope to do that as a detailed translation so it can be a little bit more clear. The rim or an edge. He measured the wall thereof, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel. The building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. And the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third. So we have here essentially 12 stones, 12 precious stones that are in the foundations. And what's interesting is 9 of the 12 are found as 9 stones of the 12 in the high priest breastplate, if you remember, and I'll show you there in Exodus. 9 of those stones appear in the high priest breastplate. If you remember, he had a detailed breastplate, an ephod, that had the stones. Each stone was representing each one of the tribes, plus the Urim and the Thummim, which were those stones, we'll call them lights. And nobody really wants to describe, but in them, wisdom was found. It's still a mystery to me that this is one part of the Bible that leaves me kind of scratching my head, because these stones only had the ability to answer yes or no answer at all. So, like, if you were asking God a question like, God, is it going to rain because I need rain for my crops, and you didn't hear a word back, it could be that rain was coming. It's still a mystery to me as to how you could have yes or no answers, but you'd think that with all of the bling that was on the priest, there'd be some other dimension of wisdom just beyond yes or no. Now, no one knows what happened to these stones, but I choose to believe that if you take a look at all of these stones and understand how the Urim and the Thummim was used, I believe that these stones that are being referenced here in Revelation are important because they were mentioned in the high priest ephod in Exodus 28, which we'll look at. they were also equally mentioned, if you remember, in Ezekiel, in that description of what begins with to the king of Tyre, but we really know it is describing Lucifer himself with all of these precious stones as his covering. So there's something to this. When you find these type of descriptions being repeated, and we have these type of descriptions even at the very beginning of Revelation, where John is describing something he sees, and he describes it in terms of, at one point, like a rainbow before the throne. In other places, he's describing brilliant light and brilliant colors. So the one thing we can be sure of with all of these stones, first of all, do not think of stones like we think of today. Many of these stones that are being described, and I found this interesting, some of them are deeper in color, but all have the capacity to obviously reflect light, and are all, except for some, for example, like the emerald wouldn't do this, but some of these would actually have a whitish reflection to them. So these stones, I want you to think of brightness and reflection and every possible color that you could imagine radiating from this city. In other words, it's something that when we will see it, it'll be something that will be so breathtaking that we'll understand why there's this emphasis on the beauty of these stones. But if you're interested, the description is given of all these stones being essentially at the base of the foundation, if you will, of each of these sections. And then it says the 12 gates were 12 pearls. This is another interesting description because it tells you that the 12 gates themselves, each gate was essentially like one giant pearl. And that would have to be a pretty big clam. Just saying. I don't know. It kind of makes you equally kind of think about all those jokes that people used to tell about the pearly gates, except we have a caricature of it. I can't even begin to imagine what one single gate, let alone 12 gates that are 12 whole pearls, what that would even look like. But to get an idea, remember I said to you there's not going to be a need. Verse 23, the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. So that tells us something. This city will have the radiance, which will be the Shekinah, the radiance of God, along with all of these incredibly vibrant, striking, precious jewels. Indulge me for a minute, though, because I do want to point something out there in Exodus 28. If you will turn there with me, and if you just want to listen along, that's fine too. In Exodus 28, beginning at verse 4, these are the garments which they shall make: a breastplate, and an ephod, and a robe, and a broidered coat, a mitre, a girdle. They shall make holy garments for Aaron thy brother and his sons, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office. They shall take gold and blue, purple, scarlet, fine linen. They shall make the ephod of gold, of blue, of purple, of scarlet, of fine twined linen, cunning work. The shoulder pieces, he's describing the girdle. Then thou shalt take 2 onyx stones, grave on them the names of the children of Israel, 6 of their names on one stone, 6 on the rest. And then, of course, describing the work of an engraver, we have the chains that will essentially link these together from shoulder to shoulder. Thou shalt make the breastplate of judgment with cunning work. After the work of the ephod, thou shalt make it of gold, of blue, of purple. And it goes on to keep describing 4 square it shall be, being doubled. A span shall be a length thereof, gives a complete description. And then here begins the stones. So it says here, the first row shall be sardius, a topaz, a carbuncle. This shall be the first row. The second row, emerald, sapphire, diamond. Third row, ligure, agate, and amethyst. Fourth row, beryl, onyx, jasper. And they shall be set in gold in their enclosings. And the stones are the names of the children of Israel, 12 according to their names. like the engravings of a signet. Everyone with his name shall be they according to the 12 tribes. So you can see that these stones don't just appear here in Revelation. They equally appear, as I've said, and we've looked at this many times, in Ezekiel. If you want to turn there, and we'll look at them there as well. I sometimes think when you see things with your own eyes, you can kind of line up some pretty good imagery. Ezekiel 28, and beginning at verse 12, which I've read here many times, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and sing unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, the carbuncle, the gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. So you can see clearly that these stones are important. And if you take where these things are situated, there is something very interesting that we can do, which is to see, for example, to the north, the three eldest sons of Leah, that would be Reuben, Judah, and Levi, are north. To the east, the sons of Rachel, Joseph, Benjamin, along with Dan. There'll be a change there into the temple and its organization in Revelation, but here in Ezekiel, Leah's three other sons, Simeon, Issachar, and Zebulun to the south, and to the west it's Gad, Asher, and Naphtali. The southern gates, first foundation, we have the gate of Gad, which I have equated to the jasper. This is what's interesting, is you can actually pair up according to the stones listed in both Exodus 28 and what we are to understand out of Ezekiel and out of Revelation. We can actually line up the stones with each respective tribe to know which stone stands for which tribe. So, for example, the first foundation, gate of Gad, jasper. Second foundation, sapphire, gate of Simeon. Third, cornelian, gate of Reuben. Fourth, emerald, gate of Zebulun. 5, sardonyx, gate of Issachar. 6, sardius, gate of Judah. The northern gates, the chrysolite, the gate of Dan. Beryl, or the foundation, I should say, the gate of Asher. The peridot, the gate of Naphtali. The western gates, you've got the chrysoprase, which is the gate of Ephraim, the jacinth gate of Manasseh, and the amethyst of Benjamin. Why do I say this to you? Because people often ask me, how do the tribes, the precious gems, and other things relate to a subject that many people still remain plagued about, which is the lining up of the stars, where people tend to read too much into astrology. But in both, we'll call it both studies, you can line all this up and you can actually, from there, go to what was taught here many years ago, the gospel in the stars, and you can see the connection with the stones, with each of these individuals and what they actually represent. For example, the lion in the sky, the tribe of Judah. There are so many interesting dimensions to this that you could take it and get lost in a black hole of, no pun intended. But why I'm pointing this out, though, is to say I do not think that there's anything in God's book that is just some random piece of information. Details are given for a reason. And I think that in this case, the stones that we have just looked at, they are representational of something. They were, think about this, if I just read to you out of Ezekiel 28, when it's essentially speaking of Lucifer, when it says that this was, his covering was of these precious stones. And then the next place you find is it tells you that there's something to these stones. They weren't just mere decorations for Lucifer. They represented something with God. That, I believe, will remain a mystery for us. It's something that's kind of in the realm of definitely a gray area, but still very fascinating to just study and try and wrap our minds around. Now, if we go back to Revelation, and I want to talk about the city just a little bit now, because we've been given this image. The question might be asked, for example, when it says about the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. We know, obviously, for example, Judas was replaced with Matthias. Somebody might say, well, Matthias didn't do anything, but his name will appear there. Either that or the Apostle Paul will be the 12th in God's book. I'm not sure how that will work. But the one thing that I find interesting is the numbers. Again, here we have these, what I just referenced, 12. You've got the 12 being the number of tribes. And then at the very beginning, if you remember, we saw the 24 elders around the throne. This is why I said to you, if you're studying this and you start to see the numbers and patterns, you can recognize that some of the scenes we are seeing towards the end are also scenes that are playing out as, we'll call them vision vignettes that John is granted to see, that are snippets. It's not like we're going to see the whole thing unfold perfectly and seamlessly, but they're like vignettes of visions that he has seen. So the 24 elders around the throne, the radiance of what he saw, what he described as like unto a rainbow, the brilliance of the colors, all of this becomes vitally important to understand what we will be a part of. Now, there are several questions that I know maybe if you're like me, you can ask a lot of questions. I don't think anybody asks more than me. So the big question is, why a wall? Right? It seems so very current. It seems like this book is very current right now. Why a wall, right? But here's what is important. There is, at this point in what we'll call new history, all right? There will be no one, if you read from 21 onward, there will be no one essentially attacking the inside of the city. That will have already essentially, all of the things that are part of the curse will have been done away with. So the very important thing that we have to consider when we're looking at this wall is it had to suggest something as a visual. Remember, the tabernacle had its wall of partition that was to keep man away from the purity and the holiness of God. Here, a different situation. And I believe the wall, obviously you couldn't have gates to a city. Like, what's the point of having a gate, and how would the gate stand if you didn't have a wall? That's just probably basic engineering right there. You didn't need to come to church for that one. But I think the wall is something that is more an actual wall, but representing something. That representation is that the presence of God is here. Inside the city, as we know, just as Ezekiel described it, the Lord is there, or just as John describes it, the Lord is there. So I think that wall cannot be to keep people in, that's number one, and it can't be to keep people out. So the wall has to be for some other reason. The other thing that's equally interesting is if you go back into the Gospels, you'll find something being said of the disciples. Do you remember how it said in the regeneration they'll be sitting and judging? Kind of remarkable that you get to this point and you realize that God's made all of these provisions. You're reading through the book and you're starting to see all of the things that he has described coming to pass. The city itself, and this is something we have to kind of try and put in our minds. In a modern society, we don't have any frame of reference for this. But if you go back in antiquity, every city, every important city would have been a fortified city. Again, there are elements to this we have to put into the social mindset of the day of this writing. So this is why a lot of times we read, for example, in Ezra and Nehemiah, when it says so-and-so was sitting at the gate, The gate was a place, for example, where important business was done, where if you were a prominent person, you were seen. Sometimes matters of judgment would be dealt with at the gate. So for cities of antiquity, fortifications were important. You wouldn't have a city without fortifications. You wouldn't have a city without at least 1 or 2 entrance and exits. So the fact that we have 12 is not just like, oh, well now we'll just include the disciples and we'll include the tribes. There's something more being said here that really suggests that as Christ spoke of himself when he said, I am the way, and I am the door, and through me. Remember, those, we'll call them the elders of antiquity, I believe Jesus ministered to when it says that he preached in his death while he was in the grave to the departed spirits. So this whole band has the good news of Jesus Christ, not just the new. The old were preached to as well, representing a time which is spoken of out of Ezekiel, as well as, by the way, in Revelation, but it's perfectly clear in Ezekiel. The time of the 2 sticks of Judah and Israel that will be put back together as one nation in the hand. So the unity of all the tribes being put back. And then on the other side, Jesus saying, other sheep I have not of this fold, bringing in the Gentiles or any other nation. You have a complete picture of these 12 gates and the gems and everything that is around them, of essentially God saying, this is how I've opened the doors. And when people in this day and age say, God has limited himself, it's like, I'm thinking to myself, well, you must not be reading the same book as I am, because God has set out a place and said, all are welcome. There's only one criteria to making it in, and that's trusting him, faithing in him, and recognizing he is indeed Lord and Savior, that he came in the flesh, laid down his life, essentially took his life again, ascended, came out of the tomb, resurrected, ascended, and is coming back. These gates and this depiction tell you something of how God has said, I include from the past. The mistake a lot of people do when they talk about the future of, and I'm going to use a specific word, the future of the Jewish people. They always make this mistake of homogenizing Israel and Jewish people as being one and the same. They are not. And the mistake that is very clear, that somehow God will not come back to deal with his chosen people, because he did say, essentially turning aside out of Paul's writing to say that wild olive branch to be grafted back in. So these gates represent old and new. They represent all of, if you think of it, 4 is the number of the whole earth, 12 is divine government. This is why I said the numbers, and I gave you the numbers. You could talk about divine government, 12, 12. You could look at the numbers in here and say, and 4, divine government of the whole earth, or divine government of the new Jerusalem and the new earth. With that being said, and I wish I could do this better justice, because this is somewhat of a difficult message. If we are really talking about what will happen before this time, there will be a clarion call, which is why I probably will have to go back and talk about the 144,000 preachers of righteousness who will go out and offer essentially what I've called the last call, a clarion call to respond to the good news of Jesus Christ. From this picture that I've just described, and if you read with me, I'll go back and reread 23, but my focus will be verse 24 of the 21st chapter. The city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof, and the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. The gates shall not be shut at all by day, and there shall be no night there. So we have a clear picture when I say of the nations. It's the reason why we have represented in this city essentially both testaments, Old and New, the saints of old and new, representing the doorway that God basically said, this was my plan, my unfolding plan of redemption for humankind, for the earth. And why we should pay attention to this particular section. It's not, it's easy to say, well, do you believe that this is what it'll look like? Yeah, I actually do. We don't have any other roadmap, but what we do have is we have, as I've described this, as shadows that were previously there that became reality. They became what was just being presented as roughly or lightly seen has now become the absolute reality. And if somebody said to me, well, okay, now you've spent all these weeks talking about heaven and hell, more so about heaven than hell, what does this mean for the people, the saved people of the earth? It means just exactly that when I say the curse is lifted, this is why it says no more tears, all the provisions that we humanly will need to live with him. He is the light. He will provide the water. He will provide the tree that yields its fruit. And once more, the image that we are brought to is an image of something that brings us back to before the fall in the garden, which is why I said to you, this is an area I cannot tell you that I have any clarity on, but I know and understand that the stones that have been described as being in the city, and the fact that Satan himself, or Lucifer, was covered in these stones, and that Ezekiel saw these stones, tells me these stones will be there because it's something that God had brought in the beginning, had conveyed this as something that would be for the generations, and it has continued and will continue until this time. Then in chapter 22, it says, he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. Now, somebody might ask this question, well, haven't the nations been healed already? We'll go back to verse 24 when it says, and the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it. It means that all ethnon, every walk of life, just when you thought you had figured out who's going to be there, that's why we're told to not judge. That's why we're told, essentially, you take care of you. You focus on you. You worry about you and your relationship with God. And the people that you have issue with, it's a good time to say, pray for your enemies. That's exactly what the scripture says, and recognize that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. The Lord will take care of his own, and the Lord will also take care of those that have oppressed and hurt his own. But this may be my favorite verse of the whole book, which occurs in chapter 22 and verse 3. And there shall be no more curse. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about life on this earth, and I think about what exactly it would mean to live life here on earth without the curse. Obviously, no more death, no more dying, no more pain, no more suffering, no more disease, no more sin, no more thoughts that are disconnected and away from him. In other words, if you could describe perfect love, the perfect love that God has for his creation and his creation has for him, you've gotten a glimpse into what it means, no more curse. No more curse means there'll never be a time in the future, during this time, where you'll say, my eyes are growing dim and my sight's getting blurry. And there'll never be a time when pain riddles your body or riddles your soul. There will never be a time. Now, that excites me because the time we're living in right now and the times we live in are terrible times. They're not good times. To actually see, and I know I said this a week or two ago, and you may disagree with me, that's fine. Be respectful if you do. we're seeing the fruit of a godless society. It's hard enough as people who actually are people of the book struggle enough in the fight between flesh and spirit. But in a godless society where you are your own God and there is no ultimate beyond you and above you, therefore there is no hope. And if we're going to talk about this, let me just say one thing. The difference between this city with its walls and any other city with walls, including ones that are in the autonomous zone, is that until the curse is lifted, the hate that's in our hearts, the thing that plagues us the most. Somebody said, well, why can't we just, you've heard this before, why can't we just get along? We can't. I'm sure there's somebody in some pulpit somewhere saying, if we could just all pray for one another, we could all get along, we could all love one another, because that's what this book says. The problem is, even for the Christian, and I'm not a hypocrite, I say this in all honesty and sincerity, even for the Christian, that's a difficult charge. I have yet to meet an honest person, honestly, who doesn't wrestle with some form of hatred for something, someone, some part of existing today that you say, I could do without that. And whether that's brought on by sin, your own, somebody else's, doesn't matter. What I'm saying here is to imagine a world and a place where we would have no more curse, where our thoughts are not divided anymore, where our ability to relate to God is on the purest level. There is no gap between us. There is no space that separates us. Humankind, and we are that. Just go back to the beginning of the book. You see brother turned against brother. Don't try and analyze today's problems as something new and novel, because it's not. But in the day when there'll be no more curse, and this may be the most important thing I want to say to you before I get done here. We've only known curse our whole lives. Man has only known in our time, most of you, no, I'm going to say, I don't think there's a Methuselah here in my midst. Most of you have worked your whole life, some working 2 and 3 jobs just to get by. And you think of a day when God will say, well done, good and faithful servant, enter in, and you only have to do one thing. Just like Adam did when God gave him dominion and gave him the responsibility in the garden, is to tend and look after, to just be a steward, but to no longer have to, as the Bible tells us, the curse having to work by the sweat of your brow, or for the woman, pain in childbirth. I want you to think about all of the things in our life that are directly, as a direct consequence of the curse, and then try and think of life with that completely removed. I don't think we can. I don't think I can. I mean, I'm talking to you now and I'm talking it out, but I don't think I can imagine a time, a place, other than what I'm reading, which is feeding my mind with the understanding that when it equally says that the animals will lay down with one another, no longer needing to kill one another. That came with the curse. Things like weeds on earth. I didn't say weed, I said weeds. Came with the curse. I love my carnal audience. I love you so much because I always know you go right there. But my point is, something to consider, something to think about. And I'm hoping through all of these messages, something has changed in you because something has changed in me. I didn't have fear of death or fear of dying before I started this series. Why? Because I believe what the Bible says, and I have clear understanding. God didn't create and make this crazy earth and its inhabitants just to say, you're done. The plug is pulled and you're now in the ground and that's it. there is something beyond here, which is why we're told over and over. I mean, we're pretty hard-headed if you can't get this over and over and over, that in him, in Christ, just for trusting him, just for taking him at his word, for faithing, I will have life eternal. You will have life eternal. And we've been discussing that life eternal. But now I'm asking you to think about this for the rest of the day, maybe for the rest of the week. What would it mean to live in a place with no curse? You are no longer cursed. I am no longer cursed. The earth is no longer cursed. And God's people, I mean, I'm saying it right now, but it's even hard to imagine that God's people could actually live as a body, as a unit, as one. That's kind of staggering. If you think about current events and the times we're living in, I want you to, in your mind, juxtapose what I just said with the reality of where we're at. And that's why I said to you, it is this godless society. Now, I can't make people. I'd love to have the magic wand. I'm not going to lie to you. I'd love to have the magic wand to be able to do this and have the attention of anyone who's never wanted to listen just for a brief second, where I could actually get inside the brain and tell them, wake up, you're missing out on something that God really wants you to hear. But I don't have a wand, and that's not even my calling. That's God's responsibility to open up, to wake up, which is why I said he'll have that one final last call from those preachers of righteousness to go out and preach to the remnant that is left, anyone who will hear. And which is why I still stand here week after week trying to get the hardheads out there and the people out there who are sometimes what I call them is like stone cold, disinterested. It's like, why does she go off on these subjects? And what does it matter to her? Well, maybe it matters to me because, as I've told you, I spent the first half of my life out in the world living essentially godlessly. There wasn't God. Even though God existed, God wasn't important in my life. And then suddenly you wake up one day and you realize, I didn't actually try to make this happen. God preveniently reached down and was telling me something if I would pay attention and listen. And now I'm standing here in front of you some 25 years later saying, this book and the faith that I preach is not something relegated to an antiquated theology or an old-timey thought process or the good old days, but rather is looking to the very problems of our current society and the very beautiful thing that God said that he promises to do, which is to give us a renewed place, something that we can look to and say, I want to go there. I want to be a part of that place. And no, I'm not talking about something that's make-believe. There are actually too many songs in some of these hymnals that make it into a caricature of the reality of what it will be. And all this description of the city and its gates may sound quite fantastic. But I can tell you this, when God does something, he's not a God that does something just a little bit. After all, take a look at the earth and our solar system and our universe, and you can say it all just happened to fall into place because evolution and everything else just made it so perfectly. It just fell right into place. Or you can say when God does something, he does it in grand fashion. And believe you me, this description has a pretty grand appeal to it. So what do I take away from all this? We do currently see faintly and dimly. We do look through a glass and see very dimly. The glass is this book, if you will. We see very dimly what will be. But if we can at least look at the things we see in dim light, knowing that the actuality of what they are, you and I will not be disappointed. My greatest thing as I look at this verse, and I keep looking at it, no more curse, says God has made a way and provisions for you and for I to be filled with hope and with faith, that we're not just going through this life through the motions aimlessly, and ultimately one day we all end up in that place in the ground and who cares. God says, no, I have a plan for my creation, for those who will trust me and take me at my word. And I'm going to do just that. I'm taking him at his word that this book contains and reveals. That's why it's called a revelation, an uncovering of something that will be, that was given to John. And it says, this is the crazy thing. Don't seal up the message in this book. What's the book that has been the most closed by the church? Don't seal up this book. Keep telling people about what I have planned and what will happen. The things that are unpleasant in this book, vials of wrath being poured out, sections of the earth being destroyed, the great battle of Armageddon. There's a lot of things in this book that you'd say, wow, that's just gruesome, that's terrible. But God says, essentially, I'll deal with these people, and then I'll deal with these people, and then I'll deal with these people, and finally I will deal with my people. And last I checked, that's exactly what we call him. We call him our God. I call him my God. And he says, these are my people who will inhabit my city. So, no more curse in the future. Right now, we just keep our eyes focused and rejoice at something that's quite amazing that awaits all of us. That's not something, like I said, pie in the sky or a fantasy or a mere myth, but something tangible, something beautiful that awaits those who have placed their trust in him. And I'm saying to you, if you are in this day, today, living and you're feeling like, I'm not so sure, things are out of control, start today with, what time I'm afraid. What does the verse say? I will trust in the Lord. And when I get to the point where I'm able to just stand and say, I'm not afraid anymore, it will be just that. I'm not afraid, Lord. I know what your word says. I know what your promise says. So I'm standing on it. That is for you and I to claim, so I'm claiming it today in Jesus' name. That's my message. I'm Pastor Melissa Scott, pastor of Faith Center, Glendale, California. I teach every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. If you'd like to attend services with us, simply call the 800 number, that is 800-338-3030, to join us. If you'd like to watch, listen, and learn 24 hours a day, simply log on to our website at www.pastormelissascott.com.